Gather round, kids. Let old Leo tell you a story. You see that place over there? That dark, ugly blot on the horizon? That's Middefield Arena Industrial Park. It's a place of shadows and sorrow. A place where dreams went to die. People in Carrowmore, they don't go near it. They say it's haunted, cursed. They're not wrong. But it's not ghosts you should fear. It's the memory of evil. The memory of a man who built an empire on pain. They say no one who goes in ever comes out the same. It's a warning I give to you, just as it was given to me. I was there. I saw it all. I saw the good men fall and the bad men rise. I saw the greed, the cruelty, and the darkness that lived in the heart of Middefield Arena. It wasn't always an industrial park. It was once a place of roaring crowds and brutal fights. A place where men tested their strength, their will, their very souls. But it was all a lie. A grand stage for one man's wickedness. A man named Vance Croft. He was the king of that kingdom, and his crown was forged from the suffering of others. So listen close. This is a story you need to hear. That place stands as a monument to what happens when one man's ambition has no limits. It's a story of betrayal, a story of revenge. But it's also a story of hope. It's the story of a hero who rose from the ashes of his own life to face the monster who created him. His name was Silas BlackWood. He was the greatest fighter Middefield had ever seen. He was also the most tragic. He fought for a man he thought was his savior. A man he called a father. He never knew that man was the devil in disguise. The devil who had stolen everything from him. So, before you even think of stepping foot near that wretched place, you need to understand its history. You need to know the blood that was spilt on that ground. You need to know about the lives that were broken within its walls. It's a heavy tale, full of darkness, but sometimes you have to walk through the darkness to appreciate the light. This is the story of Middefield Arena, the story of Vance Croft, and the story of how Silas BlackWood brought justice to a place that had only known pain. This is how the legend was born.
Vance Croft was a man carved from stone and ice. He arrived in Carrowmore with nothing but a ruthless ambition that burned like a cold fire. He saw the town not as a community, but as a resource to be exploited. He built Middefield Arena from the ground up, a temple to violence where men battered each other for his profit. But the arena was just the beginning. He expanded his empire into factories and warehouses, creating the Middefield Industrial Park. He was the biggest employer in town, but he was no savior. He was a tyrant. He ruled with an iron fist, and his heart was a vault where no kindness was ever stored. He cared for two things, money and power, and he would do anything to get more of both. His employees were just numbers on a spreadsheet, cogs in his machine. He paid them barely enough to survive, worked them until they were exhausted, and discarded them when they were no longer useful. He was a predator, and his favorite prey were the vulnerable. He committed terrible crimes, especially against the women who worked for him. He used his power to intimidate, to harass, and to silence anyone who dared to speak against him. The whole town feared him, but they depended on his wages, so they suffered in silence. Vance had a presence that could chill a room. He was a big man, always dressed in expensive suits that couldn't hide the ugliness within. He had a smile that never reached his cold, dead eyes. When he walked through his factories, a hush would fall. Everyone knew his reputation. Everyone had heard the whispers of his cruelty, of the people who had crossed him and disappeared. He was more than a boss. He was a king, and Middefield was his dark, miserable kingdom. He believed he was above the law, above morality, above everything. And for a long time, he was right.
His web of influence spread throughout Carrowmore. He had politicians in his pocket and the police looking the other way. To the outside world, he was a successful businessman, a pillar of the community, but to those who lived under his shadow, he was a monster. He collected secrets and used them as weapons. He turned people against each other, thriving on the chaos and mistrust he created. Vance Croft didn't just build an industrial park, he built a prison. And everyone in Carrowmore was an inmate, whether they knew it or not. This was the world he crafted, a world built on fear.
Into this world of darkness came a boy named Silas BlackWood. Silas lost his parents in what everyone called a tragic accident, a car crash on a rain-slicked road. He was just a child, left with nothing and no one. That's when Vance Croft stepped in. He appeared like a guardian angel, taking the orphaned boy under his wing. He told Silas that his father, James, had been a dear friend. He promised to raise Silas as his own son. To the grieving boy, Vance was a savior. He gave him a home, food, and a purpose. Silas looked up to Vance, believing he was a kind and generous man. Vance saw potential in Silas. He saw the fire of his father, the raw strength and determination, so he began to mold him. He trained him to be a fighter. Day after day, he pushed Silas to be stronger, faster, tougher. He filled the boy's head with stories of glory in the ring. He told him that fighting was the only thing that mattered. Silas, desperate for a father figure, soaked it all in. He wanted to make Vance proud. He wanted to repay the man who had saved him. He poured all his pain and loss into his training, becoming a formidable force in the Middefield arena.
As Silas grew into a young man, his bond with Vance deepened. He truly believed Vance was his family. He saw the ruthless businessman, but he was told it was just the cost of success. He was blind to the cruelty, deaf to the whispers of Vance's crimes. Vance kept him isolated within the world of the arena, shielding him from the ugly truths of his empire. Silas's world was the gym, the ring, and the approving nods from the man he called his father. He fought with a ferocity that thrilled the crowds, all to earn the respect of the monster who was secretly his greatest enemy.
Silas never questioned his life. Why would he? He had a home. He had a purpose. He had a father who believed in him. He was the star of Middefield Arena, a local hero to the people who came to watch the fights. They cheered his name, not knowing the boy was a prisoner in a gilded cage. He was Vance Croft's greatest creation, a powerful weapon that was completely loyal. A son who would protect his father's legacy, unaware that this legacy was built on the graves of his own parents. The boy was a pawn in a long and bitter game he didn't even know he was playing.
To understand the darkness in Vance Croft's heart, you have to go back further, back to a time before Middefield Arena, when Vance was just a young man with a chip on his shoulder. He grew up in the shadow of another man, James BlackWood. James was everything Vance was not. He was naturally gifted, charismatic, and loved by everyone. They were rivals from the start, in the schoolyard, in business, and in the boxing ring. James always seemed to be one step ahead, and it drove Vance mad with jealousy. He saw James not as a rival, but as an obstacle to his own greatness. Their rivalry became even more intense because of a woman named Susan. She was beautiful, kind, and smart. Both men fell in love with her.
Vance tried to win her over with promises of wealth and power. He was possessive and controlling, but Susan saw the darkness in him.
She chose James. She was drawn to his warmth, his integrity, and his genuine heart. They got married, and their love was a beacon of light in Carrowmore.
For Vance, this was the ultimate defeat. It wasn't just losing a woman, it was James winning again. The rejection twisted his jealousy into a deep, cold hatred. James and Susan BlackWood built a life together. James started a small construction business and was known for being fair and honest. They were happy. They had a son, Silas. Their life was a constant reminder to Vance of everything he couldn't have. He watched from a distance, his bitterness festering like a poison. He couldn't stand to see James succeed. He couldn't stand to see him happy with the woman Vance believed should have been his. This personal failure fueled his ruthless ambition. If he couldn't have love and respect, he would seize power and fear instead. The rivalry between Vance and James often played out in the boxing ring. They were the two best local fighters. Their matches were legendary. James fought with skill and heart. Vance fought with a brutal win-at-all-costs mentality. He was willing to bend the rules, to fight dirty, to do whatever it took to put James on the canvas. These fights weren't just about sport, they were battles for dominance, for pride. And for Vance, they were a way to unleash the rage he felt towards the man who had everything he ever wanted. This long and bitter history set the stage for a tragedy that would change everything. The year was 1969, the Carrowmore Regional Championship. This was it, the biggest fight of their lives.
Vance Croft versus James BlackWood.
The whole town was buzzing. Middefield Arena was packed to the rafters. The air was thick with anticipation. This wasn't just another fight. This was the culmination of a lifelong rivalry. James was the defending champion, the people's hero. Vance was the challenger, the hungry wolf circling his prey. He had been training relentlessly, driven by his burning hatred.
I told everyone this time would be different. This time, I will not be denied my victory.
The fight was brutal from the opening bell. James used his superior skill, his fluid movement, and his sharp jabs. Vance was a storm of pure aggression. He charged forward, throwing heavy, powerful punches, trying to overwhelm James with brute force. For round after round, they battled. James was ahead on points, his technique proving superior to Vance's raw power. The crowd was roaring, chanting James's name.
I was at ringside, my face a mask of worry and hope.
With every punch James landed, Vance's fury grew. He was being humiliated again, in front of the whole town, in front of Susan. As the final rounds approached, Vance became more desperate. He started using dirty tactics. An elbow here, a thumb in the eye there. The referee warned him, but Vance didn't care. In the final round, James was still in control. He was on his way to another victory. Then, it happened. In a clinch, Vance did the unthinkable.
I delivered a devastating illegal blow to the back of James's head.
James staggered, his eyes glazed over. He fell to the canvas, not just knocked out, but seriously injured. The crowd fell silent, a wave of shock and horror washing over them.
I couldn't believe what I was seeing.
Vance raised his arms in victory, but there were no cheers, only boos and cries of cheat. The referee disqualified him, but the damage was done. James was carried from the ring on a stretcher. He would never fight again. The blow had caused permanent damage, ending his career and affecting his health for the rest of his short life. Vance had won nothing that night, but he had taken everything from James. He had stolen his championship, his health, and his future. It was a hollow victory, born from pure malice. But for Vance, it was only the beginning of his revenge. The loss in the ring wasn't enough for Vance Croft. His hatred for James BlackWood was, well, a bottomless pit. He had ruined James's career, but James still had Susan. He still had his family. He still had a life. Vance just couldn't stand it. So, a few years after that fateful fight, he decided to end the rivalry once and for all. On a dark and stormy night, Vance followed James and Susan as they drove home. He knew their route. He knew the dangerous curve by the old bridge. He saw his opportunity to make it look like a tragic accident, an act of God.
With cold, calculated precision, I used my own heavy vehicle to force their car off the road. I watched as it tumbled down the embankment, a mangled wreck of steel and shattered glass. I didn't stay to help. I didn't call for an ambulance. I just drove away into the night, leaving them to their fate.
James and Susan BlackWood died that night. The police report concluded it was an accident caused by the bad weather and a dangerous road. No one suspected foul play. No one suspected the truth. Vance Croft had committed the perfect murder, but his plan had another, even more twisted part. He knew they had a son, Silas. In his sick mind, taking the boy was the final, ultimate victory over James. He would raise James's son as his own. He would mold him, control him, and turn him into a reflection of himself. It was the ultimate act of possession. He would erase the legacy of James BlackWood and replace it with his own.
So I played the part of the grieving friend. I went to the authorities, expressed my deep sorrow, and offered to take care of the poor, orphaned boy.
And so, Vance became a father to the son of the man he had murdered. He showered Silas with attention, but it was not love. It was ownership. Every time he looked at Silas, he saw his victory. He saw the final, crushing defeat of his lifelong rival. He was raising James BlackWood's son to call him father, to love him, to fight for him. It was a secret he guarded with his life, a constant source of dark satisfaction. The greatest deception in the history of Caramore was complete. Vance Croft had not just killed his enemy, he had stolen his legacy. Years passed. Under Vance Croft's guidance, Silas BlackWood grew into an incredible fighter. He was, honestly, a machine in the ring. Powerful, skilled, and relentless. He became the undisputed champion of Middefield Arena. The crowds loved him. They saw a local boy who had overcome tragedy to become a hero. They chanted his name.
For my part, I believed I was honoring the man who had saved me. Every victory, every championship belt was a tribute to Vance. I was living the life Vance had designed for me, completely unaware of the horrifying truth that lay beneath it all.
Silas was Vance's golden goose. His fights brought in huge amounts of money, fueling Vance's expanding empire. But Silas saw none of the darkness. Vance kept him in a bubble, focused only on training and fighting. He was surrounded by people loyal to Vance, people who would never dare to speak the truth. Silas saw Vance as a tough but fair mentor, a father who pushed him to be the best.
I missed the fear in the eyes of the factory workers. I didn't hear the desperate whispers about Vance's cruelty. I was the champion of a kingdom, but I was also its most oblivious prisoner.
Despite his success, there was a sadness in Silas, a void that victory could never fill. He had vague, fragmented memories of his real parents, a warm smile from his mother, the feeling of being held in his father's strong arms.
Sometimes I asked Vance about them, but he'd always give short, dismissive answers. He'd say they were good people, but that the past was the past. He told me to focus on the future, on my next fight.
He didn't want Silas digging into a history that could unravel his entire world. As he became a man, Silas started to see small cracks in the facade. He saw how Vance treated others, the casual cruelty, the dismissive arrogance. He started to feel a growing unease. Something felt wrong. The world outside the boxing ring seemed much darker than he had ever imagined.
I was the king of the arena, but I was beginning to wonder about the kingdom I served. I was a champion, but I was not free. My loyalty to Vance was starting to waver, replaced by a nagging suspicion that I was part of something terrible.
The truth was waiting in the shadows, ready to explode. The year is 1980. Silas is at the peak of his career, preparing for another big championship fight. He is a local legend, the face of Middefield. But the whispers against Vance Croft are growing louder. His crimes have become too many, his cruelty too bold. People are starting to find their courage.
And one of those people is me, Leo Brusser. I was just a young lad back then, working in the arena. I saw everything. I saw the fear. I saw the pain. And I saw the truth about what happened to James BlackWood's family. I had kept quiet for years, terrified of Vance. But I couldn't live with the silence any longer. I knew I had to tell Silas. It was a massive risk. If Vance found out, I was a dead man. I waited for the right moment. The night before the big fight, I found Silas alone in the locker room. My heart was pounding in my chest. I told him everything. I told him about the rivalry between Vance and his real father, James. I told him about the love they both had for his mother, Susan. I told him about the dirty fight in 1969 that ended his father's career, and then, with tears in my eyes, I told him the darkest secret of all. I told him that his parents' death was no accident. I told him that Vance Croft, the man he called a father, had murdered them in cold blood. I told him that he had been raised by his family's killer.
At first I didn't believe him. I couldn't. My entire life, my entire identity was built on a lie. I grabbed Leo, my eyes filled with rage and confusion. I called him a liar.
But as I laid out the evidence, the little details that never made sense, he started to see it. The fragmented memories, the sadness he could never explain, it all started to click into place.
The realization hit him like a physical blow. The world he knew shattered into a million pieces. The man he had loved and respected was a monster. The victories he had celebrated were built on the blood of his own parents. The rage that filled him was unlike anything he had ever felt in the ring. It was a pure, white-hot fury. This wasn't about a championship anymore. This was about justice. This was about vengeance.
I looked at Leo, my eyes now cold and hard as steel. I knew what I had to do. The next night's fight wouldn't be for a title. It would be a final confrontation.
The main event. Middefield Arena was electric. The crowd was chanting Silas's name, but Silas wasn't there to fight his opponent. He walked to the ring, took the microphone, and the whole arena fell silent. He looked directly at Vance Croft, who was sitting at ringside beaming with pride. And then Silas spoke. His voice, amplified throughout the arena, was steady and cold.
I want everyone to know the truth. This is about James and Susan BlackWood, my real parents. This is about the fight in 1969. And that man, yeah, that man right there, he murdered my parents.
A collective gasp swept through the crowd. Vance's face turned from pride to panic. He tried to signal for security, to cut the microphone, but it was too late. The truth was out. Silas dropped the microphone and vaulted over the ropes, striding directly towards Vance. The crowd erupted. Some people fled in fear, but many stayed, watching the drama unfold. They had lived in fear of Vance for too long. Now their champion was confronting the tyrant. Vance's security guards moved to intercept Silas, but he was a man possessed. He tossed them aside like they were nothing. He stood before Vance, the man who had stolen his life. All the lies, all the manipulation, all the pain came pouring out.
You took everything from me!
Vance, for the first time in his life, looked terrified. He tried to deny it, but his eyes betrayed him. The final confrontation was not a long one. A fire started in the chaos of the panic, began to spread through the old arena. In the smoke and confusion, Silas served his justice. Vance Croft's reign of terror ended that night, buried in the ashes of the empire he had built on suffering. Silas left him there and walked out of the burning arena, leaving his old life behind. Silas BlackWood found his redemption not in revenge, but in what came after. He turned his back on the violence and the fame. He used his name and the story of his parents to help the community heal.
He established a foundation in their name, the BlackWood Foundation, to support families and workers who had been exploited by Vance. He helped rebuild Carrowmore, Not with factories of fear, but with centers of hope.
He found peace, not in a cheering crowd, but in quiet acts of service. He finally honored his real parents, not by fighting, but by building a better world. The darkness of Middefield Arena was defeated, and from its ruins, something good was finally allowed to grow.